Everyone. Next on our agenda is consideration and action PB 18-09 Muddy Acres request for a preliminary plat use permit for a type 2 5-lot major conservation subdivision on 13.33 acres located on Tulls Creek Road, tax map 14, parcel 18H, Melyock Township. If I could have all parties that are going to speak to this come forward and be sworn in. Put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The case before you tonight is a 5-lot major subdivision, conservation subdivision located along Tulls Creek Road. It is adjacent to Dustin Acres. And you may ask, why are you seeing a 5-lot subdivision? Typically, these are handled at staff, at the staff level. But the parent parcel has been subdivided so many times. At this point, this next subdivision is going to kick it into a major subdivision, type 2 major subdivision, which requires a use permit at this point. So let me give you a little bit of background information. It is currently zoned ag. It is rural in the 2006 land use plan, but it's also in the Melyock Small Area Plan, it is a limited service. So there's a little background information on that. We did get this. So they are, so the applicant is requesting a 5-lot conservation subdivision with the average lot size at just under 1 acre at 0.842 acres. It is a 13-acre tract, and there's going to be 8 acres held in open space, 5.8 acres for wooded wetlands, and 2.8 acres in historic farmland. It is going to be 0.375 units per acre. This is going to be served with county water, and they will be putting in a new road into this subdivision called Smitty Lane. There will not be any sewer, but the lots will be served with septic, and the Albemarle Regional Health Department has provisionally approved these lots for septic. And we didn't have the plat that was put into your packet, but there are going to be 3 open space properties put in here, and at the front of the property will be the stormwater retention pond in the front.
We did get those.
Did you get the plat?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not on here. So there are going to be lot line swells that we're going to be draining to roadside swells that will then be going to the front of the property to their retention pond.
So all the water is going to remain on site?
It will eventually drain out through roadside ditches along Tulls Creek.
Thank you.
Yes.
That corner lot up there, that was cut out right in there, yeah, is that gonna be affected at all with the drainage, or?
It shouldn't be. They should have drained, and I think it's going to drain this way along Tulls Creek, is what my understanding.
That corner usually floods, but at curve in the road, but with the drainage, ditch or the pond, maybe that'll help some.
So it should
Hopefully.
improve it. Right.
And that would be a question for the applicant, the engineer, once he gets up here as well.
That's what you're doing, right?
So it will be generated 1 elementary school student and less than 1 middle school and high school students. There is a 25-foot landscape buffer along the road frontage. There's a 30-foot buffer along at the back end of the property is wetlands, wooded wetlands back here in the back, and there will be a 30-foot wetlands buffer at the back property back here. The majority, all the lots will be located in this more farmed area in the aerial photo. They are dedicating their just over $1,200 for the Recreation and Park Dedication Fund. And that's all for the staff report. I will go over the preliminary staff findings for the use permit process. So it is a use permit. You have to have findings of fact, and there's 4 findings of fact, and typically the applicant does 2 of those, and staff does the last 2. The first, the use will be in conformity with the land use plan or other officially adopted plans. Preliminary staff finding is that the proposed subdivision is in general conformity with the county's land use plan and current UDO. The proposed subdivision will be held in the UDO standards for layout, screening, and other requirements. The Moyock Small Area Plan classifies this site as limited service on the future land use map. And the use will not exceed the county's ability to provide adequate public facilities, including but not limited to schools, fire and rescue, law enforcement, and other county facilities. In preliminary staff findings that utility services are available to the site, and on-site wastewater disposal will be designed and permitted in accordance with state rules and standards. The location of the proposed subdivision is already within a defined school and fire, rescue, and law enforcement areas. The proposed subdivision layout is designed to conform with the North Carolina Fire Code, along with county fire officials' preferred hydrant location and equipment reaches. The proposed subdivision will not exceed the county's ability to provide adequate public facilities. I just went over the generation rates for the schools. The elementary schools, 1 student, and less than 1 student for the middle and high schools generated. And you can see in the staff report that we are still below that 85% capacity rate for our schools. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. LoCicero?
So this is not a rezoning, this is just a use plat, correct?
Yes, it is a use permit and a preliminary plat for five lots.
Any further questions? If not, if the applicant could come forward. Please state your name for the record, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Dylan Tillett. I'm an engineer with Quibble & Associates. Myself and the owner are here tonight to address any questions and comments you guys have on the subdivision. The only comment that I took note of during discussion so far is the direction of the drain. Do you have the picture up? Our direction leaving our stormwater pond will not be going to that problem corner that you mentioned, floods. There is a crossing right here. Our pond will overflow towards the wooded area and drain. There's a existing lot line swale that crosses right at the corner, right in front of our property.
If I can, Ms. LoCicero, there was 4 findings of fact, and you provided 2 of them.
Yes.
What were the other 2 that Mr. Tillett needed to present to us?
That the use will not endanger the public health or safety, and the use will not injure the value of adjoining or abutting lands, and will be in harmony with the area in which it is located.
Would you like to speak to those 2 items?
Self-explanatory.
Okay.
We don't anticipate harming adjacent properties or.
Fair enough.
Which is the only adjoining property that's got any structures on them, right? Dustin, okay, yeah, and then, okay.
And this is a similar use to adjacent Dustin Acres is residential subdivision and residential lots other than that surround this property.
And the lots to the, that would be west of Sunwood, Connecticut. The wooded lots, the side, are those just individual lots that can't be further subdivided?
I'm
Opposite Dustin Acres.
Those green looking shaded areas.
across Tulls Creek.
No, it's right beside it. There's looks like there's 3, there's.
Okay. Back this way over here on this side. Okay. I'm not sure if those are part of Muddy Acres, Dustin Lane, and Foxglove Acres that you all saw earlier this spring. These are all part of the Ward subdivision. I know all three of those. One was a rezoning, and then this one is a use permit, and they were all part of a larger parent tract. I'm not sure about the properties over here on the west side.
Thank you.
It says in here that 3 of the 4 ditches are going to be filled in. What's the purpose of that?
So currently, Dustin Acres, the way their stormwater management plan works is they go to 4 separate ponds on the outside of their subdivision. When those ponds fill up and overflow, they then drain into the existing agricultural ditches that are that go across this land. In order to be able to propose lots on this, we'll be filling in those ditches and redirecting that around our proposed development. What it's doing is just redirecting an existing ditch that enables us to provide a subdivision.
This is 3 of them?
There is 1, 2, 3. That's correct. The first one, are you asking where they are located? Mm-hmm. The first one is located, I don't know the best way to explain it, right behind the property by the road.
Okay.
There are faint lines. There we go. There's the
Okay.
first one. The second one is
Right here?
right there. Yep. The third one is right there. And there's a 4th ditch along the wood line that we will not be touching. And those are just existing agricultural ditches. They were taken advantage of during design for overflow. And then now, since we're going to try to develop on this lot, we'll just be redirecting them around. They'll be going down to the first ditch that you saw, and we'll exit that way.
So obviously the one ditch is bigger than the 3.
Yes, we'll be regrading it to
I think
accommodate the
that was
additional
her
flow.
leading question.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. We'll be designing it to accommodate the additional flow.
And will you have sidewalks?
Sidewalks will not be proposed in the ordinance. 5 lots or less, they were not required. We did not propose them.
In one place, you state that you're going to have sidewalks. And then in another section, you state you're not going to have
During
sidewalks.
earlier design, there was sidewalk shown. It was discovered during TRC meeting that the ordinance allowed it not to propose sidewalks with the number of lots that we're proposing. So that's probably why.
I have a question about the property value. You've got a cutout with property right on Tulls Creek in the cutout close to the entrance. Has there been any discussion with those property owners on the value being devaluing their property with this development?
Earlier on in the project, we were pursuing a conditional rezone, and in that case, we performed a community meeting. Those property owners did show up to the meeting. We had discussions. I don't believe there were anything that amounted to negativity. I believe those property owners are here tonight if they would like to speak towards that, but I don't recall any.
Well, I mean, have you had any expert conversations or expert witness to say that it would not affect their property value?
Property value? No, ma'am. We have not had any expert witnesses to
Okay, so
test for that.
thank.
Any further questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. With that, I'll open the public hearing.
Thank you all.
And I have Cameron Tabor. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Comment.
Cameron Tabor, 608 Tulls Creek Road. I live in this little notch that's missing in this giant triangle here, rectangle, excuse me. And I had some questions and concerns. I did attend the meeting that was there and knew nothing much. But I do have some questions about in the back, it was addressed right up close to where my property is. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There's a piece there, and it's a rather substantial piece of property. It's 3 acres or so. And in one drawing, it calls it a stormwater basin, and another one, a secondary conservation area. Now, I don't really know what either one of those are, but I don't think either one of them are the same thing. So if someone could tell me what that is. Ms. LaCicero?
Yes. And the applicant may can speak more to this, but there are going to be 3 open space areas within the subdivision. That one right there by your property in the back, and then along
On the
this
inside of where the road is, yeah.
on this eastern property line. But within that open space area is where they are going to contain the stormwater basin. They're going to direct the stormwater from this project to there, and that will meet the county's stormwater.
So that's a nice name for a pond?
It's a nice name for a pond.
Yeah. And this is a big pond?
It would meet the standards.
3 acres is a big pond. Yeah.
Where exactly are you?
You come in Tulse Creek Road from Moyock, Puddin Ridge, if you will. Okay? You come, you know where the dump. Panther Landing Road.
Panther Landing.
And then you go into the curve, and that's where that curve is, right here, is that curve is where I am, right in that, on the inside of that, or the outside of that curve. 2+ miles from
Here's-
168 on the north end of Tulse Creek Road. And across the road is all forest. But, thank you for asking. So we're going to talk about this. This could be a giant pond, or will be a giant pond.
It will
I
be
mean,
a stormwater
by our
pond.
standards, 3 acres, pretty big pond.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not, no, I'm just saying, because I was concerned about this. So that's called a stormwater basin.
Yes, it'll be the stormwater basin.
Okay, so the secondary conservation area was just a proposal that just never really happened, is that correct?
The secondary conservation area it runs along here on the eastern side of the property, adjacent to the road.
Oh, okay. So I'm talking about 2 different pieces.
Yeah, so you're talking about two
Okay,
different people.
okay.
pieces.
That answers my question. Well, my concern about the storm water basin is, I mean, all kind of things grow there. It becomes an environment by itself, with the water moccasins and the Nutra, and the list goes on. And this will be right up next to my house, I'll assume. I have to believe it would be.
Well,
I mean, there was no clear-cut boundaries of where this stormwater basin was going to be that I saw.
I think it's just going to be contained on that property, according to their preliminary plat. So they will meet their stormwater basin will meet the county stormwater manual.
And I understand they have to do that, yes. They
Okay.
have to replace the water that falls on the roof. I understand that. Okay, so this basin, if it's, there's no maintenance for that as far as the cattails and all the stuff. Say they put the basin in and it's 45 feet from my property. That 45 feet is going to be left to go feral?
Well, they will have to maintain that so that it functions properly.
I
Then
understand, okay.
Berm or buffers or this.
That makes sense, but what I'm saying is, it's not going to be mowed, or it's going to go. I'm concerned about creatures. I mean, this lady right here is not going to go for a cottonmouth coming up her yard every day, and I'm just concerned about that, so I know what to look for. And I'm asking you. I'm not scolding you. Please don't think I am. You look like I am. That's not my intention here. I'm just concerned about what's going to be in my backyard. We're used to having a soybean field, and now we've got a zoo, for lack of a better term. And is that what I should expect? Is that what am I asking the right question?
Is it gonna be maintained?
I mean, yeah, is it going to be maintained? If it's not, if I went over there and mowed it, would I be charged with trespassing?
I think a better question would be for the applicant to address this, because there's other conservation areas that possibly they could put a stormwater pond in a different location. I understand that the flow of water can't go uphill.
Yeah.
So they're putting it strategically where it best fits this property. But I would like for the engineer to speak to that for you.
Mr. Chairman, may I be so bold as to have
Hey.
him come up?
You absolutely may.
Could you do it at 3, I guess?
Thank you. A couple
Swear to tell the truth.
points I want to address is the size of that pond. That area is not 3 acres. You can see on your page sheet 2 of 3 of the preliminary plat, that open space for the stormwater basin is 1.71 acres. And that's actually the boundary of that. The stormwater basin is smaller than that area, so it would be smaller than 1.71 acres. According to Currituck County's UDO, we are allowed to put stormwater features in open space areas. The open space area for this subdivision is 60% of the entire parent parcel. So we're able to work with that. The state requires a maintenance and operation and maintenance agreement that the developer maintains and then hands over to the property owners association at the correct time. So the pond will be maintained. It's a requirement within the state to maintain the vegetation within a certain height. The list goes on about maintaining this thing so it performs the right function. Is there any other questions yet?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead.
If I can first,
Yes, please.
if it isn't maintained, what are the repercussions?
The state, they regulate that. I'm not sure how to speak to their monitoring of the North Carolina stormwater features. If there's complaints, then I think they address them in those manners with civil processes.
May I ask another question?
Good.
Would you help me out, Mr. Cicero, so the board can see it? We're going to look on the south, the longest part of the cut across there. Yes, ma'am, thank you. All right, in that, there's a ditch.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's a drain ditch. You spoke of the drain ditches, okay? And that'll be filled in?
That one will not be filled in. No, sir. No. Originally, that was the plan. That ditch will remain. The second and third ditches will
Yeah,
be filled
because that ditch goes over here, and there's a ditch here that goes, Commissioner Hall brought of where this drains into Shingle Landing Creek, I guess eventually, doesn't it?
The only portion of that ditch that will be filled in is
The swell.
the culvert entrance to get past that ditch in order to access our subdivision.
Okay, I understand.
So are you saying there's just 2 ditches?
That's correct. Number 2 and number 3 that I previously explained will be filled in.
And that's right there where
Number
Miss
one-
Cicero's,
Yep, that
and
will be filled in.
then the dark spot.
And that will be filled in. The last ditch at the edge of the woods will remain as well.
And what I'm driving at here is when these others were built, these others over here, and of course they put in retention ponds and everything else.
Yes, sir.
When a hard rain came, I had septic issues.
Okay.
Now, day or two I'm fine. Some more, but and that's why I'm worried about this water business, because you guys are gone. I live there.
That's understandable. This pond will be following all the state wastewater rules, which are in place to eliminate issues such as that. Our distances, setbacks, all that will be met. May I ask how old your system is, your wastewater system? They don't last forever.
Oh yeah, it's aged. Not as old as I am, but it's
Okay. There's several factors that could go into a failing wastewater system.
yeah. Well, I mean, we just never had any problems, and I'm no wastewater genius. Okay, I'm no those stormwater genius and none of that stuff. But the correlation of those houses going in and me having issues happened, and That's all I got to go by.
It's an understandable concern. All I can say is the appropriate rules that are in place and enforced by the state will be followed. And I don't foresee a pond going back there having any effect on your drain field.
Is there any reason why you couldn't put it at the OS3? The pond?
The wetlands, OS3 is the wetlands.
Oh, okay, I didn't
No,
blow
sir.
it up enough.
We are
Never
not
mind,
going
okay. Never mind, I didn't blow it up big enough. Never mind.
Mr. Taylor, before the other two subdivisions were in, did you have septic problems?
No, I have not. And that's the point I was bringing, was I'm no genius at this stuff, but the fact remains that the next couple of rains, we had a problem. And it was, it's just the two of us there, so it's not like we're overwhelming the system. And it would clear up. I mean, only after a dry, you get a driving rain where it's been, we all live in Currituck here, and we know what happens when it rains. But only after that did I have the issue. So if that caused it, gee, I don't know, but it looks like cause and effect to me. Thank you. And can we address one other question? I might be getting the cart before the horse. Ms. LaCicero, would you go back to the long spot again where the proposed, make sure I call it what it really is, stormwater basin goes? Now, should this board decide to make a decision for you? Now, I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to do what they're going to do. But I would like some latitude so I don't have to go to the state and hire an attorney to have that grass mowed. Are you with me? Am I making sense?
Understand.
Okay. And if I decide to go back there and mow it because water moccasins is coming up my yard, I don't want to be charged for trespassing. Can that be addressed? Can this board address that? I don't know where y'all's heads are, but
I don't think so. I don't know.
we'll talk about it
Private
later.
property, can't we?
You can't.
Can we do private property?
Enter a good neighbor agreement?
Yeah, good
I mean,
neighbor
certainly
agreement. Okay.
These two parties get into an agreement, but the board could conceivably add it as a condition reasonably related to the use of the property that the applicant maintain the stormwater basin in a certain manner, but you have to make that determination as to what manner that would be.
Chairman Hanning, may I ask to swear in the property owner? I believe you have some comments to
Yes, you
address
may.
to this.
If you can grab a Bible, sir. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Bradley Smith. I'm with Landmark Custom Homes. The property is mine. Mr. Cameron and I have spoken before. And to answer a couple of his questions there is, number one, you and I have worked well together. I don't care if you cut the property or not. But one of the things that came up in some of the preliminary stuff, and I actually had him, when we were looking at stuff, originally we included some of that possibly to be a buffer. Because Mr. Cameron expressed to us in the meeting that he had some septic issues. The reality of Dustin Lane is all of our water is retained on site, and unless it goes over a certain threshold, it doesn't leave that property. So my argument there is that's just sheer coincidence. But what we did find out is when we were doing the Albemarle Regional Health permits for this property, one of the things that originally came up is that property directly behind Mr. Cameron was zoned engineered. So when we restructured the properties, that was part of the reason we also pushed the land back, is to get out of the one section of that property that required engineered septic systems. So the property directly abutting his property behind him requires engineered systems. Now, how far that goes on your property at this point, I have no answer for. But I do know that section there is engineered. Part of the argument that I would make when I was talking to Dylan about that is, my thought with that is putting the pond back there behind you in a lot of ways may help alleviate some of the water from his property as well as a secondary. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not designing it to do that, but when you have a low area behind you, the water should travel. So you'll have your existing ditch plus possibly some other storage. But in terms of grass cutting, there'll be in our covenant some things where the homeowners will ultimately maintain that. But I'm never going to come talk to you about cutting the grass if you decide to cut it. So,
Yeah, see, we both don't know that, and I don't want to. This board's not going to address that.
right.
I don't want to go hire an attorney 10 years down, 5 years down the road, 6 months down the road, this summer. So call it what you want to. I wouldn't mind cutting a reasonable amount, probably. This board does not have the authority
Right.
to require you to do that. They don't have the authority to give me
Right.
the opportunity to do that.
Understood.
So I'd like to address that because I know what happens back there when you let it go. I'm serious.
No, and I understand your concerns, which is why I wanted to answer some of your questions there.
That field was fertilized for 25 years. It grows well.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, if it'll appease my buddy Mr. Cameron here, if the board decides to grant us approval today, put a condition on it that I will
They don't
give
have that
him.
authority.
Well, I don't know any other way to resolve it tonight other than, but anybody that knows me here, I'm a man of my word. I think you would agree to that.
Never had a problem with you.
I will give Mr. Cameron some sort of document in writing that if you want to cut up to 50 feet behind your house for maintenance, that I've got no problem with that. And I'll put it with the
We'll see
homeowner's
what this
paperwork.
board does. We'll see what this board does.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you all. Any further comments, Mr. Tabor? Any further comments, Mr. Tabor?
I have none, except that, like I said, I had concern with the septic. I was, you can't read the future. We do the best we can.
Okay,
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners.
you're welcome. Anyone else like to speak to this issue? With that, I'll close the public hearing. Any further questions for Ms. LaCicero? With that, I'll open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, just to disclose this, Mr. Cameron Tabor is a friend of mine and a down the street neighbor. I just want to make sure the board is aware, but I believe I can give an impartial, vote and opinion.
Okay. Floor is open for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, it's, the burden of proof is on the applicant to prove the 4 facts of finding, and the one fact that I'm not sure that has been provided is that it will not injure the value to the adjoining and abutting lands. I'm also concerned with this conservation area with the water basin in there, so I would like to postpone this. I would make a motion to postpone this to either the first or second meeting of June to have further conversations so that proof can be provided.
I'll second it.
Would that motion be more
Oh.
specific in the first meeting?
To find a date?
If the applicant
I think it'd be
can-
helpful to just, if you want to go ahead and include in your motion the specific meeting date that you would like to have the matter brought forward, but say, and then,
the applicant, can you provide that within 2 weeks, or do you want me to give you to the second meeting of June?
I guess, and I'm sure planning staff will speak with the applicant and after this meeting or in the morning to help them understand what it is that would need to be provided in order that the board can make a finding as to that particular element of the case.
The only aspect and/or comment I would offer is if Mr. Tabor is likewise concerned about the injuring of his property value. That if he's not concerned about that, then I think we're fine. But are you concerned about your property value?
You may.
Quite frankly, Mr. Belmont, and thank you for that. I don't know enough about it, but I would be more than happy to come down and speak with someone here because we're talking about property value in the zoning, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure who to speak to, whether it would be Donna Voliva or
What
Mr.
happens
Tabor,
is the
it's-
applicant has to provide expert testimony that says it's not going to injure your property's value.
But I would,
But just saying it's not going to injure your property's value is not an expert opinion from his perspective.
And-
If you were okay with it, then we'd probably continue pressing on.
well, I understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Mr. McCree, I'm gonna pick your brain a little bit. He's my legal scholar that helped me when I was on the Board of Adjustment, would be to form a rebuttal. Right now, I don't have the information to rebut You said it yourself, and it's perfect. His is not an expert
Mr.
opinion.
Mr. Tabor,
Are you concerned with the value of your
Are
property?
you
currently?
concerned with the value of your property and this
As we
basin
all
being
are,
put in?
yes.
Okay. well,
Okay,
then
that's
we
all we
have-
need to know.
We haven't
Thank you.
gotten, okay, yep.
That's what we need to know.
Before we move on, now that's, what particular form of, what are you looking for in order to show that we're not affecting staff? Property value.
Yeah, we can speak to that, but typically a property appraiser,
Real estate
a
appraisal.
real estate appraiser.
And with that being said, then I will go ahead and make my motion to postpone this until June 18th.
I second that.
We have a second from Mr. Payment. Do we have any further discussion? He said it first. You gotta be a little bit quicker, man. I'm sorry. I'll just call it like I see it.
His voice.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to our next agenda item, PB 18-12, sign illumination, text amendment to modify the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 5, Development Standards to address sign lighting. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a text amendment is to address an unintended consequence from the sign ordinance update last year in 2017 that brought our sign ordinance into compliance with the, I'm going to get this, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, Arizona Supreme Court decision. And in that text, or in that sign ordinance update, essentially we outlawed or we didn't allow internally illuminated signs. Internally illuminated signs, think about the Dollar General over here, Sonic, McDonald's, just think all the signs that don't have lights shining on them but are internally illuminated that up and down the corridor. In that language, it got changed to all sign lighting must be full cutoff. And full cutoff lens means that there's no light pollution that comes out of these signs, that they're shielded in some way, so all the light is downcast and not up in the air.
Which would defeat the purpose.
So,
I pay
right, so
attention.
essentially it would be very difficult to have an internally illuminated sign that's full cutoff lens. Staff is fixing this unintended consequence from this update in section 5.12.7. Maintenance standards are in the sign ordinance in the sign area of the UDO by adding the language to C4 to say external sign lighting shall be full cutoff lens. And number 5, internally illuminated signs other than window signs shall only locate on lots on the mainland, Knott's Island, and Gibbs Woods. This will only impact internally illuminated signs are only allowed on the mainland, Knott's Island, and Gibbs Woods. They're not allowed on Corolla, on the Outer Banks. There still has to be externally illuminated signs, and those external lights on those signs have to be full cutoff, which goes hand in hand with our adherence to our dark sky policy. So if there are any questions about this, I'll be glad to answer them.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the text amendment to modify the UDO
I second
Chapter
it.
5.
We have a second from Mr. Beaumont. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, consideration and action PB 14-34, Currituck Reserve, a request for a 2-year extension of the preliminary plat use permit for a conservation subdivision consisting of 103 residential lots located at the terminus of Campus Drive in Moyock. That'll hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The applicant, the engineer Scott Stam, has submitted a letter requesting a use permit extension for Currituck Reserve. This is located actually near.
Library.
Yeah, near the Millyucca Library. And they came before the board in July 2016 for that use permit. This is, standard operating procedure. They are still waiting on some state permits and would like the 24-month extension. This is, the board typically handles this it's a standard, like I said, standardly, so.
I will second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to more new business, consideration of an ordinance amending Section 10-129 of the Currituck County Code of Ordinances to modify permitted size of containers for storage of rental items on the county's ocean beach. With that, I'll hand it over to Mr. McCree.
Mr. Chairman, Section 10-129 of the Code of Ordinances prohibits leaving unattended items on the beach during certain hours. There is an exception which includes a container in which items may be stored. There's been a request from interested parties that utilize those containers that the size provided for in the ordinance may be too small and limiting, particularly for popular items like surfboards, to be left within those containers. So this ordinance amendment on page 1 at line 33 will modify the size of the container allowed on the beach from 4 to 5 feet in height, from 4 to 5 feet in width, and from 8 to 13 feet in length. As this is a first reading of the ordinance, it will require a unanimous vote of the board to adopt it tonight.
Any questions for Mr. McCree?
I don't think so. This was just done to fix basically a need, right? We realized that the 4x4x8 wasn't really practical or in use.
That's
Couldn't
correct.
fit a paddleboard.
Right.
It was too small for some items that persons would allow to be left in the containers.
And I think the CCA put something about this out, and I think it's important to note that line 3, these are approved annually by the Property Owners Association of a PUD. So while they can do this, it still has to go to the PUD for ultimate approval of whether or not they want that on their beach stream.
That's correct.
Okay, so that, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. While we say you can do it, you still got to get permission from the beach boss.
I do not know how many to
Let
anticipate.
them do what they need. They got to look at them. They got to look at them.
This is out of line, but Mr. Musicalo would like to come up and make a statement.
Thank you very much for your time. I know it's really late. It's way past my bedtime. But, yeah, so I guess apparently this all happened in November, and Jenny Turner told me that she had forwarded an email to me that this was going to, the box thing was going to come up. I never got that email, whether it was my fault and it went to spam or whatever, but I did look back, and I've got every email since I had an iPhone in 2012, and I didn't receive that email, but or I didn't have the chance to read it. So I had no idea about this until about I think it was 4/25 of this year when I got an email again from Jenny Turner that said, for me, in order for me to get my driving permits in my PUD, that my boxes had to be approved by my PUD or my management company running the PUD. Now, when I read that, for me to be in compliance, of course, I picked up the phone and called Jenny Turner and said, well, to my knowledge, there's nobody that's in compliance to a 4x8 box, okay? Because a 4x8 box, once you add the sheathing on it, it's not going to be a 4x8 box. It's going to be a little bit bigger. There's only one person that's even close to a 4x8 box. Everyone else has different dimensions. I was the second company that ever started the beach services out there for the PUDs. The first one was Corral Lake in about 93, and I started doing mine in 99. So I'm going on 20 years. I'm using the same exact boxes, same dimensions that I've always used. So for me, I would just ask that maybe you consider either saying, okay, if you're already operating or have been operating and using, a certain dimension, well, then it should be, in my eyes, okay after 20 years because no one's ever had a problem with it. But also the fact that the 4x8 ever even came up was there was a meeting held in, I think, about 2012 over in Corral, I'm sorry, at the satellite office, and it was with Ben Woody and Jenny Turner and myself and one of my partners, and I think there might have been a couple other people there as well. And the question was raised, how big are these boxes? And my response was, well, they're approximately 4 by 8, because for me, my chair is 2 by 4, and I need at least 4 feet on the interior of the box, which would leave the outside of the box at 4'7", 4'8", because of the framing. You understand where I'm going with this? So no matter what, I was always thinking about the interior of the box to store my equipment, and it was just an assumption on how big the box was, okay? So I wish I was here in November to explain that, or to at least defend, what I have going on. But my boxes are actually about 4.5 foot wide, and they go up to 5.5 foot tall on one end. On the other end, it's only 4.5 or 4 foot tall, and they range 4.5 to 5.5 foot, or 4 foot 8 inches to 5.5 foot. And when I say that, also because my lid is a little bit bigger than my box, because of where I pick it up to get into the box. Okay, so one side of my biggest box is 5.5 foot, and the length is 10 foot 1 inch. So for me to go to my PUD or to management company and get the approval for me to put my boxes on, yeah, it was a concern to me because I want to be in compliance. And so that's why I raised this issue with Jenny, and I called her up, and this all started. But on the other hand, this was 3 days before I had to get my permits to start business. So I guess that's how this came about. And then I heard there's another request for larger boxes to have surfboards and SUPs. I think that's a great idea, and the reason that I even made larger boxes than the 8 foot was to put surfboards into them. And then as of last year, I know we had some issues where, what's the fine line of what you're allowed to keep on the beach and how do you store it? And then it was like, okay, absolutely nothing. No kayaks, no, nothing can be outside, on top, or around the boxes. You got to find somewhere else to put the stuff. So that was another ordinance change that we had to adapt to in the beginning of the season, and just made it a little bit more difficult. And it's fine. I'm here because I want to be in compliance, but I'm also asking. Go ahead, sir.
You're worried about it being more over 5. It says 5 foot by 5 foot by 13, so you're okay.
No, my boxes are 5 foot, like.
Inside.
Well, no, the height is 5.5 foot.
Okay.
So
And then the lid is also, the width is 5.5 foot because it's bigger than the
you're
box.
5.5.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So basically, I don't know if I'm asking you to change the dimensions to 5.5 foot to accommodate to me, or to say, hey, if you're already operating with this, anything in the future can't be any bigger than this dimension, or, what might be the best way to go about it. But of course, going into the season, I don't want to concur any additional expenses and have to, go build more boxes and do this stuff when for 20 years it was fine. That's I guess my biggest, my biggest hump here. And of course I want to be in compliance. I don't want my business to be in danger of not operating because I'm not in compliance.
And that's how we
Thank you.
got here.
Mr. McCree, how did we come up with these? Were these proposed from our planning staff?
This was suggested to me by persons in the industry that had knowledge of the type of items and their sizes that vendors
Okay,
were
so
wanting to
it-
leave on the beach in the containers.
So does 6 by 6 by 13 work?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just, and if you, like I said, if you want to.
It was
All right.
literally just talking to, I talked to Jenny Turner about it, and she was showing me the different sizes, different dimensions, and so we just kind of came up with an average number and said, okay, there we go, so.
So are the PUDs going to have issues with a 6 by 6 by 13?
Who?
They can
They don't have to
can
be
actually
that big.
downsize.
Just won't be able
PUD
to
can-
exceed,
right.
PUD can-
cannot
the PUD can
exceed that
dictate.
size, so it
Right.
needs to be
So
smaller.
if they're fine with his boxes,
Then he conforms,
good
he's
to go.
fine.
He's
Good
good.
to go.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
All right, make that motion.
I want to make a motion for approval to change the text to 6 feet in height, 6 feet in width, 13 feet in length.
I'll
Damn,
second
second.
that.
Thank you very much.
Second to Mr.
down
White.
the dirt.
Sorry.
We haven't voted yet.
You're good.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Hey,
Hearing none, motion
I
passes
know
unanimously.
you wanted to talk, and that's cool, but
We want to go home.
get back to work.
See you, Zeke.
Bob White.
Yeah, he did. Moving on, consideration of an ordinance of the Currituck County Board of Commissioners amending Section 10-64 of the Currituck County Code of Ordinance to provide for issuance of parking permits for leased motor vehicles. With that, I'll hand it over to Mr. McCree.
Actually, since that title, this ordinance has, it's kind of been modified again. So, as I guess we've been experiencing, persons now coming in to acquire the parking permits. There's, first of all, I refer you to page 2, line 20, which is paragraph E of the ordinance. There's a requirement that county residents and non-resident property owners may obtain for no fee, a parking permit for each motor vehicle owned by them. Well, then the question became, well, what if I lease a vehicle? What if one's assigned to me by my work or somebody else? So, to clarify that issue, the proposal on line 22 would be to add, not only may they get a permit for each motor vehicle owned by them, but also if it happens to be leased by them or is assigned to them. So that would be that first modification. Likewise, in line 24, the same words adding to ownership by showing proof of ownership, lease, or assignment of the motor vehicle. And then going on down to line 29, there became another question about, why cannot county residents and non-resident property owners also obtain guest passes in some way like other classes of property owners are able to obtain? So what is proposed in line 29 is that county residents and non-resident property owners may obtain additional parking permits that are not issued to a specific motor vehicle, so they don't have to worry about that. They can basically use it as a guest pass that can be used on any motor vehicle they want to use it on, but they would have to make application as provided in the ordinance and pay a fee for a term adopted by the Board of Commissioners. So that's that proposal. Now, the next issue at line 39, which is section G of the ordinance, particularly Commissioner White brought this to our attention, I guess after seeking to obtain his parking permits, but also observing the process and what staff was having to go through at the visitor center in terms of comparing documentation and proof of ownership and verifying that and the time that was taking, and recognizing that this may become very complicating and unsettling event for tourists as they try to get these passes. It was suggested, well, for persons who are not county residents or non-resident property owners, do we really care whether they have to show proof of ownership of the motor vehicle or whether it's leased or assigned? I mean, they've got to have some kind of legal interest in the motor vehicle that they are traveling in or using. So do we really need to have proof of that and verify it all? And then secondly, that's the main thing. They would not be required to show proof of ownership or liability insurance, because you've got to have liability insurance in order to use a motor vehicle. So this would then strike out from tourists, but persons who are not county residents or non-resident property owners would be able to come in and with a very simple application, fill out their name, the vehicle to which they want the permit assigned, which would be written on the permit itself. But that would and then they would sign the acknowledgement that they've read the rules of the road and understand the rules on the North Beach, that would be sufficient for them to be able to get issued a pass upon payment of their fee and be out the door on their way. And that was felt like that would meet the goals and intent of the ordinance. And so that is the other suggested amendment to the ordinance.
Any questions for Mr. McCree?
Yeah, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Just a quick clarification. So if I allow my employees, if I give them if they have a four-wheel drive truck to use for work and I say they can use it for personal use, at that point they can get a permit then
That they won't have to come in and go through
Okay.
the process of showing, improving assignment or permission from you to use the vehicle,
Gosh, you let your employees go to the beach.
Yes.
Right, they're still paying.
The season.
Yes.
And they walk up
Going
to the
their
parking
way.
pass.
Yep.
That's correct.
Just simplified it, staff was taking, it was just wearing them out already, and they're not even selling them yet. So-
Okay.
And then, we did look at I'm sure a question will come up about, well, why do residents have to prove these things? And as we know, in Corova, on the four-wheel drive beaches, there are quite a few cars that maybe aren't exactly legal, registered, or whatever. So this just further makes sure that those vehicles are, in fact, good to go. So,
Fair enough.
so with that,
With that, any further questions for Mr. McCree? With that, open floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I will move to approve. Do I need to go into the whole thing, or-
You can state, move to adopt the ordinance as presented.
Okay, well, move to approve the ordinance as presented by county staff and submitted to us this evening.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on, resolution of the Currituck County Board of Commissioners appointing Matthew Wayne Bikert as Currituck County Sheriff. With that, I'll hand it over to Mr. McCree.
Yes, Sheriff Johnson, as alluded to earlier in the meeting, has submitted a letter announcing her retirement effective May 31st, 2018. North Carolina General Statutes provide, as set forth in the proposed resolution at Section 162-5, that upon a vacancy in the office of sheriff, the Board of Commissioners shall appoint some person to fill the unexpired term. This resolution would propose that Chief Deputy Sheriff for the county, Matthew Wayne Bikert, be appointed effective June 1st, 2018, upon furnishing the bond that's required by Section 162-8 of the General Statutes for a sheriff to post with the county.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval of that resolution.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to consent agenda.
Move for
Motion.
approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to county manager's report.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Sir? With that, I will call for a motion to adjourn the regular meeting.
So moved.
Move.
Second.
We have so moved and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. I will now open a special meeting of the Tourism Development Authority and hand it over to Mr. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have 3 budget amendments for your consideration tonight. The first one is to provide, move money around within Oxytax to provide the necessary funds to repair 2 of the walkovers that need to be structurally damaged, need to be repaired before the season. The second one is to provide the funds to support the contract for the beach cleanup that we did after the series of nor'easters. And the last one is to provide funding for a vehicle repair of a vehicle that is stationed in Corolla. And I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Scanlon?
Motion for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passed unanimously. I will now call for a motion to adjourn the special meeting of the Tourism Development Authority.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. I will now open a special meeting of the Ocean Sands Water and Sewer District and hand it over to Mr. McCree.
That'd actually be me. Mr. Chairman, you have...
Sorry, Mr. Scanlon.
You have 3 budget amendments for the Ocean Sands District. One is to move money around to provide additional funding for chemicals. We opened up the first phase of the plant, and it's cost a little bit more to operate than we initially had budgeted, so it's to move money around within that fund to provide chemicals. The second one is to provide the necessary funds. We had to construct an alternative construction entrance for the project to do Phase 2. This is providing the funds to undertake that. And the third budget amendment was to provide funding for debt service. We incurred or borrowed money mid-year to do Phase 2, and that was not originally in the original budget. So the third budget amendment is to put that debt service in there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Scanlon?
Motion for approval?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. I'll now call for an adjournment.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? We're not going into closed session this evening. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Before 11, I was wrong.